Some of you may be asking, who is this and why are they showing up in my feed? I promise you this is not what this page is about or going to be about, but this is something that I've been burdened with and have been wanting to get off of my chest for the past 5.5 years. In the fall of 2018, I was working as an imam and the director of outreach for the Islamic Center of Irving, one of the largest Islamic centers in the country. While I was on vacation in the mountains of Colorado, I received multiple missed phone calls from a community member, and upon returning, they stated that they urgently needed to speak with me. After returning from vacation, I met with him on that Thursday, and he explained to me how he witnessed an elderly man inappropriately touching a child at the center, and when he got up to confront the man, he ran away. Later that day or the next, the community member witnessed a teenager threatening the same old man for touching his younger brother. The community member explained how the confrontation was stopped, and that he, along with the older brother of the victim, family members of the perpetrator, met with members of the board to discuss the situation. During this meeting, the events were discussed, and the board members were presented with a picture of the victim who had a golf ball-sized bruise on his cheek from where the old man was forcibly sucking on it. In some twisted manner, either by fear, manipulation, or incredible stupidity, it was agreed that this matter would be squashed, and that the family would be given a few days to get the elderly man back to Pakistan. After being informed of the situation, I requested as much evidence as I could from the witness, who also provided me with the picture which showed the clear evidence of the abuse. It just so happened that the following day would be our congregational prayers, for which I was scheduled to deliver the sermon. The next morning, I went directly to the police department where I reported everything that I knew. I then went to the Islamic Center where I delivered the sermon, which subsequently went viral, exposing the issue to the community and denouncing the actions of the board. After my sermon, the president of the institution grabbed the microphone to calm everyone down. He explained how he appreciated me and my efforts to bring these types of issues to the attention of the community. He confirmed that they knew of this incident and that they did their own investigation, that they brought it to the attention of the parents who did not want to inform the police. He tried to state how this was just a big misunderstanding and how I didn't have all of the information, and so it didn't exactly happen the way that I had related it. This narrative was later used as part of the smokescreen to present the idea that this was just some sort of cultural misunderstanding. He stated how there would be no repercussions against me for bringing this issue to the community. My sermon, along with his reaction, were all streaming live and uploaded to both Facebook and YouTube. It was almost immediately deleted and then miraculously uploaded again to a community activist organization's Facebook page called Face. It was then put into a shortened and condensed version which went viral on Facebook, and then the full version again was uploaded on YouTube. The next day I was put on administrative leave and I was told not to come back to the center. After about 2 months, eventually I was told to come back to the center, but that I was to stay in my office and to not interact with the community. After a short period of time, I was told that I no longer had to come into work. I was officially let go and my contract expired. Throughout this process, there was next to no support, locally or nationally, from anyone in the community of any meaningful value. Sure, there was a hashtag campaign, I Stand With Imam Nick, but hashtags are about as good as cotton in a barn fire when what was needed was a fire hose. Unfortunately, the Muslim community was more concerned with saving face than doing the right thing. Notable Muslim leaders and organizations were silent, and some of your most beloved so-called leaders actively tried to get me to go along to get along. A hit piece was put out against me on muslimmatters.org. I was attacked in the comment sections of social media posts and on podcasts on YouTube. All because we don't want people to think bad of us, even if it came at the expense of truth and justice. I want to be clear, this silencing effort wasn't the actions of just everyday average Muslims who probably felt helpless in this situation. But I'm referring to the so-called Muslim leadership, specifically those most prominent figures who resided locally and met with me privately with other individuals to encourage me to make up with the board and continue on as normal. To this day, I find it absolutely absurd that you have individuals that do everything in their power to get in the spotlight, to get on TV, to be the spokespeople for the Muslim community. Yet when something like this, of this magnitude, happens in their backyard, they were absolutely silent. It was all just a cultural misunderstanding. Nothing to see here. And Nick was just kind of a loose cannon anyway. After these events unfolded, I disappeared. The community was allowed to believe whatever they wanted to believe. There are many issues with these series of events that need to be addressed, as I've never spoken on it before. And leaders in the community, via their silence in most cases, and by proxy in others, tried to malign me. This incident and the subsequent fallout had a really negative impact on my life. And honestly, I just really want to move on, but I feel like I have to address these issues just for the very purpose of getting it off of my chest. For this reason, I want to address several points that were made by the larger community that were used to defame me and to sweep this issue under the rug. First and foremost is that I did the right thing. There's absolutely nothing that you can say or quote to make me feel otherwise. I have many regrets about my life, but that is not one of them. No God-fearing person thinks that child molestation should be swept under the rug, squashed, or handled in-house, or any of the other demented ideas that people foolishly came up with. Do you think that anyone in America would agree that if molestation is suspected in a school where their child attends, that it should just be left for the board to do their own investigation without alerting the authorities or the community? Maybe in some other country, but not here. But of course, then they bring up the idea that, well, it wasn't exactly molestation, which brings up the second point, which was utilized in this hit piece on muslimmatters.org, which was that this was just a cultural misunderstanding. The idiots that made this claim, and those who fell for it, want you to believe that at that point in time, with my 14 years of experience in the Muslim community, working in an official capacity as a public affairs coordinator, as a director of outreach, and as an imam for a community that was predominantly from the Indian subcontinent, and with 7.5 years living in the Arab world, that I wouldn't know the difference between a cultural peck on the cheek and grabbing a child by his crotch and forcefully sucking on his face until you left bruises. Let me make this very clear for the author of that article and those who put him up to it. The man was grabbing children's crotches and kissing them on the face. This particular instance, he sucked on the boy's face until he left a bruise. This is not some cultural misunderstanding. I find it disgusting that I have to even explain this to you. The leaders of the community had access to this information. I wouldn't doubt that you had it as well. And if you didn't, you could have easily accessed it from me, but you never reached out. And the reason for that is obvious. You weren't seeking the truth. You were trying to cover for one of your own. I find it a travesty that you're an imam anywhere, and abhorrent that anyone would entrust you with their children. There were pictures. I still have them. The board had them. Community members had them. Yet your leaders, who seem to find their nose into everything that can gain them publicity, were absolutely silent. My third point. How do you know that this was an isolated incident? Well, you don't. The only way you find out is by letting the community know, not by sweeping it under the rug. But ICI thought that they were going to play Sherlock Holmes and Law & Order all in one meeting. Case closed, nothing to see here. But I ask you, when? When does one of these sickos go after just one child? The next day after my sermon, I was at the Islamic Center, and I was on the phone with my headset, speaking to another graduate of the Islamic University of Medina, so there was a witness to this conversation. An Arab man approached me, pulled me aside, and said, "Thank you, I want to thank you for what you did. That was my son." I immediately told him that you should go to the police and report the incident. You don't want this to turn out to be a bigger issue, and then people are looking at you saying, why weren't you protecting your child? We agreed to go to the police station after the prayer, so I picked him and his son up from his house, and we drove to the Irving Police Department where he made a report. On the way to the police station, I asked the young boy about his older brother in the meeting with the board. He was confused and didn't know what I was talking about, and I reiterated the question, and I said, your older brother, he met with the board to discuss what happened, and they agreed to squash everything. The young boy said to me, "I don't have an older brother." Have you figured it out yet? This isn't the same kid. It's victim number 2 out of Allah only knows how many kids. So how many more were there? We'll never know, because some imbecile, or a group of imbeciles, thought that it was okay to squash the issue and let the guy leave the country because the family of one victim reportedly didn't want to bring it to the attention of the police. The father of the boy who I went with to the police station told me that this guy would consistently try to lure kids into the hallway where there were no cameras, and he would try to grab their crotch and kiss them on his face, but his son fought back. So I asked the author of that article and those who were behind it, was that a cultural misunderstanding? Maybe you should have applied that Islamic principle of seeking more information when some sort of news comes to you like this. Now, you could have reached out to me, but let's be clear, you didn't want to know. You just wanted to cover up for one of your own. Point number 4 is that I did this the wrong way. I shouldn't have exposed this situation in a sermon. Now, a lot of people would like to theorize about what they would have done in certain situations had they been in them. But let's be clear, the vast majority of people would have done nothing. As I said before, I have no regrets. And here's a principle that you should get used to that I live by. You don't complain about how somebody does the job that you neglect to do. I should have never been in that position in the first place. I should have come home from vacation, found out what had happened and how the board did the right thing, and then congratulated them in my sermon about how that's what you're supposed to do. As for the sanctity of the sermon, the community tolerates gobbledygook sermons week in and week out about random topics that don't even make sense, politics, or fundraising for some obscure organization that's going to misuse the funds anyway. And instead of focusing on protecting those most vulnerable amongst us, you'd rather focus on my delivery and then argue about the definition of molestation rather than do something about it. I mean, at least I quoted ayat and hadith, which is more than I can say for a lot of your khatibs. I found out on Thursday. I let the people know immediately at the first opportunity that I could, reaching the most amount of people that I could. Let me ask you, if that was your child, how many days would you like me to wait? Everyone in the community had a right to know so that they could check with their children and make sure that nothing happened to them. It broke my heart to look at my son and say, would he have said something? Would he have spoken up? Because these people rarely get caught on the first attempt. And under your incredibly short-sighted, unintelligent minds, you would have done exactly what the board did and tried to cover it up. You would have allowed the man to escape justice, and other victims never would have been able to seek it. And we know that there were more victims. We just don't know how many. What you essentially did was create a straw man argument, where you created a fictitious argument that you knew you could win, so you could deflect from the actual real situation. Hey, is a kiss on the cheek molestation? No? Okay, nothing to see here. That's not what happened. The board knew that that's not what happened. The community knew that's not what happened. And the leadership knew that that's not what happened. In the afternoon of the day that I went to the police station with the second victim, after the afternoon prayer, I was confronted by about 24 angry members of the congregation who were upset with my actions. Unfortunately, the confrontation got to the point where I told the security guard that he needed to call the police. Now, I sat in my office, waiting with the security guard until the police arrived and the whole situation was diffused. But while I was in my office with this security guard, he kept pressing me. And at the time, I didn't think much of it, but he kept asking me, do you know who the perpetrator was? Did they tell you who it was? Now, this security guard was actually on the board, and his role was being in charge of youth activities. Now, the disturbing part of this was after I was let go, this guy was actually arrested for aggravated sexual assault in a completely unrelated case. I was worried about the angry mob outside of my office. I had no idea that this guy was really concerned that they had found him out. Now, I will never know this for certain, and I'm not claiming that it is true, but I will never know if the family of his victim was motivated by my sermon to speak to their child and then subsequently found out that an issue was going on, or if the child had heard about the sermon and then found the courage in himself to report what had happened to him. But so many of your leaders would prefer I had shut up, or that the Friday sermon wasn't the place to do it. Point number 5. There was no crime because nobody was arrested. This has to be one of the dumbest comments that people used. And great news to every criminal that ever went unnoticed. No arrest, no crime. Good luck finding a random dude in Pakistan. Never mind the fact that people were actively being intimidated to keep their mouths shut. People have to understand that there was a lot of pressure from inside of the community to keep this thing quiet. The same father who went with me willingly with his son and thanked me for saying what I said later called me, angrily complaining to me about how I caused him so many problems and I made him eat pork by going to the police station, and that now his wife's receiving all sorts of problems because she works at the school that's attached to the Islamic Center. So what happened to the guy who thanked me for what I did? What happened to the guy who willingly went with me to the police station and who angrily told me about the story of what happened to his child? It's clear and obvious that they were bullying people in the community to make them keep their mouths shut. Point number 6, that at the very least I was co-opted by the feminist agenda, or at worst that I was somehow a part of it. This idea was unfortunately pushed by one of my peers who resides out in Diamond Bar, California, and it was believed to be so because the video of the sermon, which was deleted and was immediately uploaded by the community activist organization FACE. And so therefore I must have coordinated these events, or at the very least I was just some sucker being used by alayhi salam. So how did the video get downloaded so quickly and re-uploaded on such short notice despite the fact that the Islamic Center deleted it? Well, brothers and sisters, one of the things that I came to know in the aftermath of this disaster was that I was not the first to know. In fact, I was one of the last. The board knew, the school knew, community members knew, and FACE already knew. In fact, later on, Alia herself told me that they had been made aware of the situation. They were just waiting for somebody to bring it to light. And I'm pretty sure one of the reasons why it was brought to my attention was because people knew I wouldn't shut up. But it makes you wonder why they didn't bring it to any of the other so-called leaders. Then again, we don't know. Maybe it was brought to them and they just didn't say anything. Regardless, when I brought it to everyone, they still remained silent. And I want to make this point clear. I don't work for anybody outside of God and my family. So if doing the right thing puts me in line with the wrong people that you don't like, I don't care. If the only help I have to save a drowning boy is somebody who you find appalling, and I'm sure you could think of some names, I'm not going to not act because I'm afraid of how you will think it will reflect on me because of who you think I associate with. Point number 7, that I made Muslims look bad. Well, if your Islam is grabbing children's crotches and sucking on their face or covering up for those who do, I didn't make you look bad. I merely put a mirror in front of you. And the mirror doesn't make you look bad. It just shows you who you are. And I have nothing to do with whatever version of Islam that is. You want to make Muslims look good? You should have done the right thing. You should have said something. You should have done something. My Islam doesn't care how you think or how anybody else thinks it looks. You have the opportunity to do the right thing. One of my best friends from college, who's a Roman Catholic and knows a thing or two about this sort of stuff, said to me, man, you served up your community a grand slam, and they struck out. This is an issue that anyone with even the slightest bit of cultural context in our country knows, especially because of the history of what happened in the Catholic Church, that we do not tolerate this stuff and we do not cover it up. And we do not move somebody from one place to another. Could you imagine if this were to happen, God forbid, in a Catholic church in today's day and age, and the priest stood up, decided to use the pulpit to expose it in defiance of his superiors? Do you really think anybody in America would be saying, oh, well, he shouldn't have done it in the Sunday sermon, and, he sounded a little bit too angry? What is wrong with you people? You had the opportunity to stand up, do the right thing, shut it down and say, we do not accept this type of behavior. We're going to have it investigated because we want to make sure that we protect the integrity of our community, and that any suspicion of it should be reported so that people that actually have the skills to investigate the matter could have. An opportunity to show your true quality, that we don't do as others have done by just moving somebody around and covering it up. You made yourselves look bad by covering it up and by not speaking out against it. You made yourselves look worse by trying to demonize me. As a community, we have to stop pretending that we don't have bad apples. Every faith, every ethnicity, every country has good and has bad people, but we're responsible for our house. And if this type of situation happens in your center, do not, under any circumstances, decide that you're going to investigate the situation yourself. Bring it to the authorities and the institutions that have trained professionals to investigate the situation and to help those who may have been affected by it. Point number 8, your so-called leaders and their deafening silence. And I want to be very, very clear about something. When I say leaders, I'm not talking about the board of the Islamic Center. I'm talking about all of your celebrity imams that were noticeably silent, and I'm talking about all of your major organizations that were noticeably silent. Out of all of the so-called leaders across the country, there were only 3 people, to my knowledge, who said anything to my defense. That was Shadid Muhammad, Joe Bradford, and Shfindim. Where were all the big shots? Abstaining like a vote in the Security Council, as if this is one we don't want to touch? Well, I can tell you some of your favorites just wanted me to go along to get along, right there in Irving. It happened right in their backyard, yet they had nothing to say. Funny how they're quick to do a photo op or chase any other opportunity to get themselves on CNN. Maybe they looked at both sides and made a business decision and decided that they didn't want to anger the very communities that fund their institutes and pay for their speaker fees. So they abstained like a vote on Palestine in the UN because they didn't want to get their hands dirty. Luckily, these people are not my imams. They are not my leaders. I'm not sure why anyone would call them as such. But to be quite frank, moving forward, that's none of my concern. I want to make it clear, I am not trying to be your imam. I do not want to be your champion. If there's any response to these videos, I'm sure it will be nothing short of personal attacks. My suggestion, believe every single thing they say about me and multiply it by 1,000. It's probably way worse. But don't let any of these celebrity imams pretend that they didn't know, or that any of their insignificant actions was the equivalent of using the major platforms that they had to speak up to defend these kids, the ones we knew about and the ones we don't. Now, a lot of people will say to me, oh, we didn't know. Well, your leaders did. They knew. They had the information. But it was easier to throw me under a bus and watch me get trampled, thrown out of the community. At this point in time, there should be absolutely no question in anybody's mind that this was just some cultural misunderstanding, as many of your leaders wanted to make it seem. There should be really big question marks in your head as to, wait a second, why didn't these guys say something? And the claim that they didn't have this information is completely bogus. It was just easier to watch me get thrown under the bus, trampled over, and run out of the community. Point number 9, that I should have discussed these events with the board before delivering my sermon. Again, let's stop acting like at that point in time I didn't have 14 years worth of experience in the Muslim community, working with organizations across the country, and that it isn't widely known that the boards of many of our organizations are wildly incompetent, looking out for their own self-interest at best, and blatantly corrupt at worst. And we're not talking about any old center. This is ICI. How many years can they go without a scandal? When a corrupt body is trying to cover up their actions, you don't alert them to your knowledge of it and give them more time to try and cover it up. I'm aware of the financial, spiritual, and organizational corruption of many of these organizations. These individuals deserve no further opportunity to protect themselves, and they're not the type of people that you cooperate with. Years after I left, these very same board members deleted thousands of emails and dozens of hours of video from the security cameras, yet your leaders thought that I should go work with these people and go along to get along? These are the type of people you want me to cooperate with? You guys need to start taking a long, hard, critical look at who you consider your leaders to be. And here's a hint. It shouldn't be the guy that has the most followers on social media. And the last point that many people try to bring up over and over again was that he sounded too angry. I firmly believe that I should have approached that situation with the same level of anger and passion that I would have had it been my own child. And for that reason, I often worry that I did not do enough, not that I was over the top. I have no concern to entertain the idea that I was over the top. The reality of the situation is that I was surprisingly under control. I was shaking as I was delivering that sermon. If I had let my anger direct my actions, things would have certainly been different. So where have I been for the past 5.5 years? Oh, we were just having a blast. Obviously, I lost my job. We moved across the country. I had no money. My only car got totaled. We were homeless for a period of time. We ended up living in somebody's attic, sleeping on the floor, living out of bags. My only job opportunity was 100% commission as a door-to-door sales guy when I'd never sold a single thing in my life. God knows how many times I've lost employment opportunities because somebody Googles my name and just reads the headlines without digging deeper to find out what actually happened. Because everybody loves a whistleblower, just not in their organization. Now I'm living the American dream like everybody else, scraping by every month just trying to make rent. Throughout these past 5.5 years, there was absolutely no support. The amount of people that even reached out to me or talked to me on a consistent basis I could count on one hand. And the vast majority of them don't respond to my calls anymore. My sense of community was utterly shattered. My religious and spiritual observance went into a complete and utter tailspin. Next to no one reached out to assist me at any point in time or even check in like, hey man, how you doing? Where you been? Haven't heard from you in a while. And the ones who did weren't from our community. And for those of you that think that now is a good time for you to reach out and say, hey brother, how's it going? I'm sorry I haven't talked to you in a while. Just wanted to check in. That ship sailed. I spent 5 hard years trying to figure out how to navigate this path on my own. Most lone wolves separated from the pack die. I'm sure for some of you it will come with some irritation to know that this one still lives. This situation helped to weaken an already broken individual. My spiritual practice fell to the point where I was ashamed of my own existence. Because as that spiritual practice fell, the smallest of mistakes I treated as if they were the greatest of mistakes. And I kept telling myself, you went to Medina, you studied, you had all of this opportunity, you were an imam. Maybe somebody else could falter, but not you. And so I continued to tell myself over and over again, God can forgive anybody, just not you. And any thought that I had inside of myself of good deeds erase bad deeds and, Allah is the most forgiving, were met by my own negative self-talk saying, now you're just making excuses for yourself. And I got stuck in a labyrinth called my mind, and it took me a while to find my way out. And when you feel unforgivable, no bad deed holds any weight on a scale that's already tipped in the wrong direction. It would be really nice to sit here and tell you that none of this fazed me, that it didn't have an effect on me. It was crushing. For years, I basically left everything except for my belief in praying 5 times a day. And because of this, for years, I felt so enveloped in a darkness that there was no direction to go to get closer to a light that I couldn't see and wasn't sure existed. The darkness felt like a cage that I was trapped inside of, screaming at the top of my lungs for help, falling on deaf ears that didn't exist, because the cage was me and my screams never left my own head. I don't think I've ever felt so lost or isolated in my entire life. And there were a lot of things that I had to traverse on my own. And it took me a lot of time to even get to the point where I'm at right now, where I feel like I can even speak about it publicly to people. The journey to this point has been filled with a lot of difficult conversations that I've had with myself. Like, why did this happen to me? Does God hate me? Is he punishing me? Is he preparing me for something? Are these just the trials that I have to go through to prepare for whatever is coming? And there were way too many days where I assumed the former in place of the latter. It would have been nice had at some point in time, any of the many people who projected like they had concern and love and companionship for me back in the day were to reach out, check in on me, see how I'm doing. But the very few, and I'm talking a handful of people who communicated with me on any level, started to fall off to the point where they wouldn't return my calls. But that's the rule of life, and it seems no different in our community. When you're somebody, everybody wants a piece. And when you're nobody, you might as well be deceased. This past year was one of the most difficult that I've ever had to deal with, but luckily Allah put people in my life from some of the most unusual places to lift me up, send me reminders, and help push me along the way. It's crazy because there's a lot of people that should have been in line before those people that entered into my life, but Allah has a plan and a way of teaching us things in the time that we have to learn them, and for that I'm grateful. So why now? Certainly there's going to be people who are going to put this down, saying you're just a big distraction with everything that's going on in the world. Why are you bringing up old wounds? And you're right, there's absolutely a lot going on in the world right now that is absolutely revolting. And while this might not be the best time for everyone else, and you'd be correct to say you should have said something years ago, honestly, I was just heartbroken. My sense of community was shattered. And any concept of brotherhood was completely destroyed. I can't express to people enough that one of the biggest draws to this faith to me was brotherhood. I remember one night I was driving home in Dallas and I was listening to NPR, and they had Jan Martel on, the author of Life of Pi, and he was being asked about all of the major religions and what was the one thing that stood out beyond everything else. And when he got to Islam, he said it's obvious. It's brotherhood. And for me, that concept just seems to be that elusive unicorn that I keep hearing about but just can't find. They say it's not what happens to you but how you react to it, and I did not react to it well at all. I really let it get to me. So yeah, the best time for me to have said something would have been way back then. But the next best time has been every day since, and this is a burden that I just don't want to carry any longer. I've essentially been hiding away for years. I've been angry, I've been frustrated, I've been dejected. I've been ashamed, scared, lost, consumed with my own thoughts. My life has been filled with numerous trials that have been heavy burdens to bear, which admittedly I have not carried well. And this entire issue has been something that has loomed over me for years. And although I wouldn't change what I did, I would definitely change how I reacted in the aftermath to what happened. Unfortunately, you don't get a second chance at the past, but you always have a chance at making the most of the present. There's so much outside of this that I've wanted to do, that I've wanted to say, but for many years I've just felt like I'm not the right person, or that I'm inadequate, or that my own personal shortcomings disqualify me from making an impact on others, or living a meaningful existence for myself and for my loved ones. Over the past few months, I've had God place some really interesting people in my life who've helped to motivate me to get outside of my self-isolation and remind me that the best of my days were when I was trying to inspire other people, and that's what I intend to continue to do. Although I've been quiet online, I've been writing and thinking a lot over these years, and there's a lot of efforts that I intend to put forth to benefit others. But I felt like I could not move forward without addressing these issues. I'm not a perfect person. I've never claimed to be a perfect person, and I haven't always done the right thing. But I'm not going to sit back and allow people to lie about what happened. Although the issues that I brought up today may cause a stir among some, I have no intention to address it ever again or comment on someone's comment or approval or refutation of me, my speech, or my actions regarding it. I'm not one of those people that enjoys the gossip mill, and you're not going to find me on the internet talking about other people. And if it weren't for the fact that people had slandered me and the fact that I had used this event as a means of self-sabotaging my own existence and needed to put it to bed, I wouldn't even address it. But sometimes you just need closure to things, and I felt like I needed that to move forward because there's a lot of stuff that I really would like to contribute, but couldn't do so without getting this out of the way. So moving forward, I have several projects that I'm working on, all of which with the intention of benefiting as many people as possible. If you've been with me before, I can assure you that things are going to look different than from what you've become accustomed to. But if you continue to follow my work on any of my pages, I'm excited to get to work with you. If not, I pray that God grants you guidance, and from that guidance, grants you success in all that you do.